In this section of videos entitled C++ Programming Basics, we've talked a lot about variables and data types and so forth. And now I want to talk about something very important about how you're dealing with your variables, and that is two properties called duration and scope. Now, all variables have these two very important properties, and you need to understand the implications of these because they, on one hand, become a great tool that you can use to help make your programs more efficient, to make them run better, to make sure you're not creating any errors or nightmares. But at the same time, you need to understand how it works because inevitably you're going to kind of let this slide from time to time, and you're going to be going back and trying to troubleshoot and figuring out why you're not getting the results that you anticipated with your code. So let's take a look first at duration. Now, what is duration? Now, duration really is just the total length of time that a variable lasts in your program. Another way to say that is, if I create variable A, how long is this variable alive in my program? Now, this is not something that you're really going to think a whole lot about, but keep in mind the duration is going to be affected by the variable scope, which we'll talk about in a minute. But when you're working with a program, let's kind of dig under the hood just a little bit. Most of the time, you've got about 1 megabyte of memory out there available, kind of on the stack, if you will, for variables and so forth. Now, the longer that a variable is alive, or the longer the duration of that variable in the program, then obviously the longer it's using memory. And that could be an issue. And there's another thing. The longer a variable is alive, the more chances I have of creating a problem shooting myself in the foot with that variable. All right, so now let's talk about scope. Now, scope is closely related to duration, but scope is the actual part of a program in which the variable is valid and usable. In other words, let's say I've got a program of 200 lines. Well, how many of those lines will a variable that I create actually work in? All right. And I'll give you a diagram in part 2 of this video a little bit later on. But for now, just understand that scope is the part of a program that the variable actually functions in. Now, once the control of the program moves outside of variable scope, the variable in essence goes away. It cannot be called, it cannot be used, and if you try to access it or use it, it'll throw a compiler error. Now, what determines the scope of a variable? Well, where the variable is actually created. All right, so the scope begins at the point on the line number in the program where the variable is created, and the scope ends at the end of the block, or the little squiggly braces that are in C++ code. So it ends wherever the end of the block is in which the variable was declared or created. All right, now, like most things in C++, that is the case usually, and we can use statics to get around that. We'll talk about statics in a total separate video. All right, so for now I'm going to end part 1 here. That's what duration and scope is. Duration, quick review: how long the variable is alive, how long we can use it. Scope: what parts of the program is this variable valid and can we use it? Okay, so join me in part 2 and we'll do a little diagram that will explain scope a little bit better. And again, like most things in C++, there are some gotchas that you need to understand here. Welcome to part 2 of duration and scope. Now, I separated duration and scope out into 2 videos because I wanted to make sure on this portion that you're about to see that I had plenty of time to go over it, and to go over it slowly, because this is absolutely key to understanding what's going on with your C++ code. Variables can get away from you really quickly. You can get all kind of unintended results, and it can create bugs that are really hard to track down. So first of all, let's take a look at some sample code here. We're going to create a very simple C++ program here, and so we'll just assume that we've opened up our development environment of choice, and we're going to first create our main function where all C++ programs start. So there's the code for it, and we can put all of our functionality in here. And so the first thing that we do is, within our main function, we create an integer that's called b, and we set it equal to 2. Now, We also, back up at the top, go outside the main function, and we create an integer called a, and we set it equal to 1. All right. Now then, within our main function, we create another block, and this could be, it's another function or whatever, and we create an integer called c, and we set it equal to 3. Now we have 3 variables here. We have an a, b, and a c, and they got 3 different values. They also have 3 different scopes, and let's talk about that, and then how you can use that. Notice we'll start with integer a first. Integer a was created at the very top outside of the brackets of main, and so it is going to exist from the time it's created here, and by the way, it's actually created before the main function executes. Now we talk all the time about how main is where a C++ program starts, but if you put variables outside the main function, they will be assigned and created first, and then the main function will run. So if you need a variable to already be in existence when main starts, that's how you do that. All right. So here's the deal though. A is going to exist and be available to every line of this code because it starts here and the scope is a closing brace on it, and so these are kind of imagined. There would be an opening brace here, and then at the very bottom of the code there would be a closing brace. All right. So that's integer 1, and notice it covers all the lines of our code. Okay. Now integer 2, notice integer 2 was created inside the main subroutine, or the main function, not subroutine. That's my old VB stuff talking. Notice here's the brace that opens the main function, and here is the brace that closes it. Now usually in most development environments in Visual C++, it will indent these for you and keep them kind of neat, but sometimes you have to do a little housekeeping. So B comes into being right here, and B's scope is going to be from here all the way down to this closing brace. So I could use B anywhere inside these braces, right? And I'm assuming this is the first line in the function, and this actually could have been up here. All right. Then inside this function, I can use B because B is in scope, all the way down to here. All right. And inside here is within the scope of these two. Okay. Now notice integer C. This is kind of interesting. C is only going to be available to me inside these 2 braces. So that means that I can use C inside here, but if I try to back up here and write code that refers to C, the compiler will throw an error and it'll say, I don't see this defined variable. What are you talking about? This doesn't exist, and that sort of thing. Now here's what you can do. You can create your variables in certain places to give them a certain scope. For example, here, if I want B to be available to anything inside my main function, then I can create it up here near the top of the main function. All right. Now, it's also kind of a good coding habit to don't create the variable, or rather not create the variable until you actually need it. Now, some people will create all their variables at the top and then use them later, and a lot of people consider that kind of sloppy. It's kind of dangerous. You can inadvertently not use a variable. You can assign it wrong things and so forth. So anyway, most people will create them where they use them. All right. But you can also tell that if I'm going to use C just kind of as a loop counter or something that's absolutely unique to this scope right here, then by creating it inside here, it comes to life when I jump into here and begin to work. But as soon as my program executes this, C goes away, the memory's released, everything's cool. All right, so there is where C is going to live. Okay, so make sure you understand that where you create your variable is going to determine the scope, or the portion of the code where you'll actually be able to access that variable or set it or use it in some way. Now you'll have to just kind of learn what's best, and let's say that I created C inside here, and then I decide later, wait a minute, man, I need that out here. No big deal. I can simply cut it, paste it out here, recompile my program, and C is now available out here between these 2 braces, and then it would also be available inside here. So the main thing you want to watch for on scope is look for the beginning and closing brace for where you create it, and from the point that you create it all the way down to the bottom of that section as designated by that closing brace, that variable will be available. Hope I haven't confused you, and I hope this has helped with understanding scope.